Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us on NTV On The Spot. We're coming to you live from Kasangati at the home of retired Colonel Dr. Kiza Besigye. Thank you so much for having us here today.
A great pleasure always to be on the spot.
Yes.
And you are most welcome to our village here in Buyinja Zone, Kasangati.
I don't think it qualifies for a village anymore. The development has sort of taken its
Yes,
standard.
the town is slowly engulfing us.
Yes. I wanted us to get straight into the conversation and maybe to start with your own sentiment. When you watched the declaration of results at the Tally Center in Chambogo, was it a deja vu moment for you, saying, I knew this is what was going to happen?
Well, actually, that question assumes that I was even watching. The truth of the matter is that I don't even pay attention anymore about what the Electoral Commission Tally Center really does after the election. Because indeed, I know for sure that it is all fake. You remember that at the last election, I drew the attention of the country to the real Tally Center, which was a house in Naguru, where the concoction, the mixing of the results that go to the Electoral Commission Tally Center were being managed from. And the best of my knowledge, that Tally Center this time, the real one, was now actually in Nakasero State Lodge, or house, I don't know, whatever they call it. So it's something that I really know for sure that you know, after the elections, it's just the emotions managing what comes out, and this is why, you know, I was very clear in the last election that we had now to announce ourselves and announce our own results. And of course, you know that when we did that, I was arrested and taken to Moroto and charged with treason there in Moroto. Later on brought to Kampala, to Ruzira, and charged with treason in Kampala. A case that has never been heard. We have gone through another election before that was resolved. Why? Because, again, they did not want to face up to the facts that indeed there was a different set of results, that Mr. Museveni had not actually won an election.
You make a very strong allegation there that a Tally Center could have been run from Nakasero, the lodge. Are there indications of evidence that you've had from the sources that you speak to that would point to that?
Well, yes, I mean, it's not, I think, evidence that, and I think that's why this time they indeed chose a more impenetrable location. There was far more incriminating evidence in Naguru, and indeed, if people, because I took the media there and so on, and we saw even people jumping, scaling the walls to run out. And if people, you know, had indeed been serious on holding the government to account, that was the moment. It's far more difficult to adduce, you know, hard evidence about a high security zone like the State Lodge. But information, because, you know, you see, what happens in situations like this, there are many people within the system itself who are abhorred by what goes on, who really would not like this to continue. And they are serving, they have no way of not being there, but they would like this to be known. And so you will always get information. Yeah.
The second runner-up in the election, Robert Kyagulanyi, has eventually gone to Supreme Court. You yourself, after 2000 and 2006, said you'd never be going back to the Supreme Court. What are those things that happened in 2001 and 2006 that you very well know mean that the court can't produce a result for a person in that case?
Well, first of all, the whole process of petition is heavily tilted against the petitioner. In the times I was petitioning, the law provided for only 10 days within which to assemble all the evidence and file the petition. And all evidence is filed by affidavit. So it's affidavit evidence. So you must have lawyers throughout the whole country to adduce that evidence before you file. In the case of a parliamentary candidate who is only managing a tiny area, they have a whole month. But for presidential, like now, we have 351 constituencies. So to adduce evidence in 351 constituencies, now they have increased the period 15 days, from 10 to 15 days. But one who is required to assemble evidence in one of those 351 constituencies has 30 days. So that is where it starts, the difficulty starts. But secondly, the determination of whether to annul or not to annul does not actually depend on the tons of evidence that you produce. It is a subjective determination by the individual judges. That whole question of substantial effect, whether whatever has been approved, shown, affects the outcome in a substantial manner. And you know, those who are interested to know what happens in the court should read Justice Kanyeihamba's book, which he has written a lot about the petition of 2006 and how it is manipulated by the state, by Mr. Museveni, the accused, not even the state. So when discretion, the discretion of determining whether to cancel or not to cancel is wide and with the individual people that are appointed by the accused. And when the accused appoints them knowing that that is one of the duties they will do, you can imagine the types of people that he will appoint and the kind of expectation you would expect them to have in exercising their discretion. So in all the petitions, 2001, 2006, we proved all the grounds of our petition completely. Whether the election was conducted in accordance with the law, there was a unanimous
7-0.
Yes, first 5-0, second time 7-0, that this was not conducted in accordance with the law. The irregularities and malpractices and so on, again, you know, the same. And even made a very significant finding that this election was not free and fair. And that's why, you know, the students of law and people who are, you know, experts in law interrogated the wisdom of the judges even to make that categorical judgment that this is not a free and fair election, but go ahead and keep it. Because the constitution of Uganda is very clear that the only election which is provided for, through which the country can have a leader, is free and fair election. So if you have made a clear judgment, written judgment that this is not a free and fair election, how can you retain it? But the Presidential Elections Act indeed gives that kind of discretionary on the substantial effect, and they can contradict themselves to that extent. So knowing all this, seeing what happened, about how especially they were using the substantial effect. And by the way, we petitioned against the interpretation that was being assigned to the substantial effect. We lodged a constitutional petition, I think in 2007. 2007. It was not ruled on until the eve of the 2016 elections. That petition remained in the Constitutional Court until the eve of the 2016 elections. And they ruled that the substantial effect you must prove, you must show, is quantitative, not qualitative. Because in the petitions we had, there was especially one, stark and really infuriating position they had taken, which was that, you remember, when people were killed, and people were killed both in 201 and 205, 206. But in 206, it was even more, dramatic, because people were killed in front of me at Bulange, shot and killed by a soldier. The dead bodies were pictured in the press and everywhere, covered by my posters. And this kind of violence and crime had a chilling effect in the whole country. But in the petition, the Solicitor General argued that if these people had not died, they had only 4 votes, So really, these could not have changed the difference of 2 million votes. So it did not have a substantial effect. And the court, in the outcome, and in the constitutional petition we filed subsequently, upheld that the interpretation of substantial effect must be quantitative. You must show that if these things had not happened, the difference in the votes would have, so it would be, either it would have been the winner, or it would be difficult to determine.
Get to the 50 plus 1.
Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Exbesi, if I could ask again, knowing that the court's looking at substantiality in the sense of having very many of these DR forms, why wouldn't the opposition then structure their campaign in such a way that you get the DR forms from each constituency where the polling happened, from each polling station? 34,000 different polling stations.
Well, that's what every candidate tries to do. But you see, again, it boils back to the same thing. What kind of competition are we having? You see, and this is where, the Ugandan, sometimes analysts or intellectuals miss the point. The contestation is not a contestation between candidates, between parties, between ideologies. No. This is the state versus whoever is contesting. You are contesting the state, not the candidate, not the NRM. So that's why the whole state machinery is organized and mobilized to ensure that you don't get the DR forms. If it means arresting your agents, they will be arrested. And indeed, part of the evidence and affidavits that are produced in these petitions are from polling stations where our agents are arrested. And so you cannot determine what happened. There is a lot of ballot stuffing. If there is no election haven't yet known what happened on that front in this just ended one. But there is no election in which I participated where we did not capture, pre-ticked ballot papers, with the people. Exactly the same ballot papers that have been distributed by the Electoral Commission. And you find, hundreds of them with the people pre-ticked in the name of Mr. Museveni. So if your agents are taken away, they can do anything. There are polling stations where, even in this last election, I was informed, and by, very, reliable sources, there are many polling stations in fact, not in polling stations. In most of Isingiro, in Ankole, there was no election at all, and that's why you journalists should bring out, go and interview people in these areas, and there was no, where all the ballot papers that were taken to the polling stations were all ticked, and so and even the results formally declared, you find that 100% of all registered voters turned up and voted for one candidate. So you had the registered voters of 1,000, maybe 850 registered voters. Nobody became sick, nobody had died, nobody was unable to come. They all came, and all of them voted for one candidate. Those kinds of things are clear manifestation that, in those situations, candidates cannot have agents, because there is even no election going on in those places. So yes, but even with the best effort of candidates, it's not possible to get or declaration forms. But even without declaration forms, you see, like in the case of my election of 2016, the declaration forms I have, even today, and I have them, because they attacked, and this is the whole thing, they attacked our headquarters in Najanankumbi. They captured a few, but the greatest majority we have, even now. And using those, you can prove that you won or that they lost. And this is why in the last election our demand was one: let's audit. Let's audit, because going to a petition again is a waste of time because of all the things I talked about. And once you go there and the judges make their judgment, there is nowhere to appeal. So the determination of the petition in the Supreme Court was only given 30 days, in which to produce
the evidence and affidavits,
or the evidence in which the respondents, Electoral Commission, the Attorney General, Mr. Museveni, have to file their responses, and then the hearing. This is a very, very short time, and you cannot audit, because you see, audit is, and it has been done in some countries, you can tell where the ballot stuffing took place, because you can, and this, even in this election, one of the things the candidates were complaining about till the end was information on what serial numbers of ballot papers were dispatched to each polling station. That is information that should be available to candidates well ahead of time, so that when ballot papers arrive at every polling station, first of all, you have the serial numbers of the seals that are sealing the boxes, and you can cross-check. Secondly, that you have the serial numbers of the ballot papers declaration forms, and so on, that are in the box, and you can cross-check them. And in auditing, this is what would be audited, to see whether those votes cast are within the votes that were at the polling station and so on and so on. So audit is what would solve some of these problems.
But the insistence has been that there is no provision in the Constitution for an audit of the election, and subjecting the country's sovereignty to an international audit might take away even the individual sovereignty of the nation.
No. You see, sovereignty is not is not entirely exclusive to the nation. Some of the sovereignty, indeed, we ourselves have taken a decision to cede to international agreements. For example, in the Constitutive Act of the East African Community, the democratic principles that every country must follow and the standards of democratic practice have been established. And there are institutions of the East African community that can adjudicate. So this is not subjecting our sovereignty to anybody. We have decided ourselves that we can work with others to ensure certain standards. There is an East African court, there is an East African, so there are institutions that can help. You don't have to go to, the same with African Union. The African Union, again, establishes standards that can, the basis of which such a thing can be. The same with the UN. So where there has been an audit in some countries like Afghanistan and other places where there were audits, it was under the auspices of the United Nations. And this is extremely important, you see, because elections are the foundations of governance of these countries and foundations of political stability. In Uganda, this was the 6th general election. No election has ever led to a peaceful transfer of power. Every, either, the one who is there just organizes the election for motions, and indeed they are declared by observers, by the courts, as not being free and fair. And that's how even Mr. Museveni, in fact, of all people that should be condemned, I think the most condemned person in Africa should be Mr. Museveni, because I was his campaigner in 1980 election under the UPM. What happened in 1980 election is far, far, far better than what you see today. No, there were no hundreds of people that were killed in 1980. There were no thousands in jail like they are today under terrible torture. You did not have, where they, it was not a free and fair election in 1980, no doubt.
The parties have complained of kidnaps during the 1980 elections. They've complained of usurping of power of the Electoral Commission.
Absolutely, like has happened. In the middle of this particular election, Mr. Museveni sacked the Electoral Commission, literally. All the senior managers he sacked in the middle of an election. So what is the difference between him and Paulo Mwanga, who sacked the secretary of the Electoral Commission, this man who was a PS of local government, at least, in fact, Paulo Mwanga sacked him after the election. But this one sacked him sacked them during the election. So what I'm saying is, that election of 1980 started a war that killed 500,000 of our people. Started by Mr. Museveni complaining about the election. So it should not be him, Maybe others could be excused, but it should not be him. 35 years later, still fighting and killing people to remain in office. And conducting this and wanting it to pass as an election.
Dr. Besigye, if I could just jog your memory. In 2006, when you addressed the press after filing your petition, after the petition was ruled in favor of the president, you said that Uganda had taken a turn back to the worse. And you said you'd never again challenge an election in a court of law. Why did you take that decision to never go to a court of law ever again to challenge an
because
election?
my clear sense is that it's an exercise in futility in terms of overturning what has happened. And that is, you know, a judgment call that I made, that I still have, that really, considering what tons of evidence we had produced and considering that indeed we had got positive judgments and so on, and that the court has, in terms of the independence, deteriorated significantly. Don't forget that the court was also directly attacked after the 2006 no, even 2001. You know, the Black Mambas attacked the court. This was in
2005. Treason trial. You were undergoing a treason trial in 2005.
2005, yes. You know, so that had a chilling effect in the whole institution. You know, there were rivers of blood in the High Court, you know, from judicial officers. You remember the whole court even went on strike, you know, protesting what had happened. So, and the same person that was doing all that is the one who has been appointing all the judges. By the way, when we, that petition which I talked about of the challenging the substantial effect, the ones who made the ruling in the Constitutional Court are all now in the Supreme Court. Now, so if you appeal, you appeal to the same people, literally. So it was a combination of the process of petition, the integrity and independence of the court, the whole political environment, the capture of state institutions overall, guided me to the conclusion that it would not lead to an outcome that I would be looking for. But that doesn't mean that it is an entirely useless exercise.
That's what I was actually coming
absolutely
to. That
not. Absolutely
only
not.
one prayer of overturning the election hasn't been granted.
Yes,
but
yes.
in terms of
reform, yes. No,
yeah.
you see, it's like elections. So, having gone through all these elections, know that the outcome of the election is not for the Electoral Commission to announce another person except Mr. Museveni, regardless of what has happened. That is my judgment call. And this is what I've been telling Ugandans. In fact, in my campaign in 2016, if anybody followed what I was telling the people, I was telling them that I have not come to ask for your vote because you have none. You know, your vote will not count. So it's not your vote that has brought me to you. I have come to you to tell you that we are in a state of capture, all of us, and that we need to organize and break out of the prison, out of captivity. So the election can be used to pass a message for liberation. The election can be used to organize people to assert their will. And those are very useful things that one should take one to an election, even when you know that the outcome will not be to end that captivity in itself. Similarly, in the courts, one of the things is, even when you go to court, it's not just those who are petitioned against that are on trial. Even the court is on trial. You are exposing the court and the institutions of the state to say, you know, those who may not know, this is how captive, this is how independent these institutions are. So you are exposing what happens in an election and what happens in a challenge of an election. And this is important for the country to understand. What goes on in an election, sometimes many people don't know, you know, the terror that has been going on in different parts, some even captured on camera, is not available to everybody in the country. Now you can bring it to court and expose it to everybody in Uganda and abroad, because part of our problems are not just created by the dictator here. The dictator is also supported by other people abroad who sometimes think that actually he has a mandate of people, and that, you know, this is one of the things that I was addressing today at our press conference. You know, the regime going to borrow, they are loading Ugandans with tons and tons of debt on our behalf. Now, in order to do that, the people who lend money to Mr. Museveni and his junta assume that this is for the good of the people of Uganda, and that the people of Uganda are happy to borrow. They have, it's authorized borrowing, and we will be happy to pay back. Whereas not. And when you have an election petition that exposes that this regime has not arisen out of a free and fair election, then whoever lends to it should also know that they are knowingly lending money to people that are not applying it for the purposes for which it was lent. And that is the definition of what we call odious debt. And the people of Uganda can then use that to say, you did this knowingly, that it's not benefiting us, we shall not pay you back. And so the court process has benefit. And that's why, although me, because you see, when you are struggling like we are, our resources are very finite, very limited, and there is a cost benefit. So if I want to go to court, if I have 2 million shillings, I must decide whether to give it to lawyers to go to court to achieve that, or whether you should use it to maybe create capacity within the population to take some action. Now the question is, what is your priority? So now this is why when we talk about a united front, that's why it is useful. Now we don't all have to do the same things, and this is what I told the country, that people can go to the election. If I don't feel that, you know, I should devote my effort and resources and time in the election, I should devote it somewhere. That is not to say that others should not go. So those who went in plan A, what I was calling plan A of the elections, I was supportive of them, what they were doing, and they exposed indeed a lot of things and so on. But if I reserve myself for another thing, it doesn't mean that, you know, I have no interest in what they are doing.
Doctor, what does that unity actually look like? What, for example, does unity in an election look like? The opposition entered the election with four different candidates.
Yes, that is a most unfortunate thing. And it's one thing that we, if we want to really free ourselves, it's one thing that we need to urgently address. There is a misconception. It starts with what we think we are fighting. You see, there are people who still have the sense that there is a democratic process going on, that actually, although there are some problems here and there, they can organize, and the military junta will hand over power to them, you know. and therefore that the constitutional election process is a useful one. We should compete, and the people, whomever they vote, they vote. Now, that is an area we need to really debate as a country, whether this is the case, whether we haven't seen enough to convince us that this is not a contestation of parties, this is not a contestation of candidates, this is a military junta organizing an election just to cover themselves that they have gone through an election, because military juntas are no longer outrightly allowed. Now, if we came to that same conclusion, we would organize differently. But that is not the conclusion we have come to yet. Secondly, you see, those who organize these elections create a situation that is that poses inherent challenges for us, because capture of the state, one of the things that it creates is that it puts the control of national resources in the hands of the captor. So Mr. Museveni singly determines who has money, who doesn't. They can deprive you of what you have. And that's what has been going on, even taking your land, taking your business. They determine who gets business, who doesn't, that power of impoverishing others is power that they have used effectively to make it difficult for us to focus on our liberation. Because even as we go into the elections, some of us thinking that we should focus on uniting to liberate ourselves. Many individuals who go into the elections are actually focusing on the salaries in the offices they are contesting for. So to tell them that, let's just get one person amongst us to help us unite on this front. And if we get that office, we use it for our liberation. It's very difficult to convince people that it will be you to get the salary and them not to be the ones to have the opportunity to get and they have made these political offices very well paid for that purpose, to become attractive and to cause wars amongst us trying to reach that prize of, if you win a seat in parliament, that you get a free vehicle of 300 million shillings, that you immediately start getting maybe a minimum of 30 million shillings every month, and so on and so forth. When the senior most professor of medicine gets maybe 5 million shillings. So that is what creates problems in the unity of our forces. Now, we need to really, we betray the country if we remain at that level. And that's a conversation I have been suggesting that we should have openly, not behind closed doors. We should have a conversation amongst all of us in front of the country. First of all, to determine what it is we are fighting, so that the country, because the country can also, should have a voice. They make a judgment, and the country makes a judgment. That's why, for the country, they unite in voting. The country is ahead of us. Even when we are split, each one trying to reach a prize, the population is not involved in that. They unite and say, now who may give us the best chance? They go with that because they know for them the starting point is to get rid of what is there. So that is a challenge that I invite all those who are in the leadership of a struggle for liberation, a struggle for change, because that change, what is the change we are looking for? Is it just a change of a leader? or it's a change of a system.
Yeah. Dr. Besje, we're going to take a very short break, but when we get back, we will discuss very openly what Plan B looks like. We'll also discuss the Supreme Court petition and what his thoughts are on changing what's already in the court process currently. With us on the spot, and we're speaking to retired Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye on the Supreme Court petition, but also very openly on his views about where the future of the country is. From 2006, actually, you decided never to go back to the courts, but you chose another method, which was civil disobedience. Rather than go back to South Africa, you stayed here and engaged in active civil disobedience. That doesn't seem to have also achieved the prize of changing the status quo. What would you say has been that journey for you, measured against what the courts have done and what civil disobedience has done?
Well, you see, first, when you come to the conclusion, as I did, that those holding state power are determined to use force to maintain it. Once it became clear that Mr. Museveni had all along been a pretender, that he was a revolutionary, that he was aiming at empowering the people of Uganda, and that he had determined to take Uganda hostage. Once that crystallized, and it did between 2001 and 2006, because in 2001, don't forget, I was only released from the military 3 months to the election. I was released in October, to be precise, and we were being nominated in November. And so there was no time, and there were no parties at that time. Any contestation was on individual merit. An individual that you would have to organize a campaign structure in all the districts in 1 month. So I considered that, but you know how the whole country was mobilized on its own. It was not me who did it. On its own, it was electrified, and that's why it became the most violent election until the present one. And so at the end of the election, of course, the terror went on, and that's why I went outside. I suspected then that maybe because I was talking to the other, don't forget that before that, some of my colleagues tried to persuade me that this would be Mr. Museveni's last term. Said, now you have done, you are the problem, because you should have left the man finish his second term. And I told them that there is no second term because of what he was doing. And I gave them reasons why there could not be a last term for Mr. Museveni, because it was clear to me even then that he was entrenching himself not as a person who was in transition. But my colleagues did not understand that. They thought I had provoked the situation. I was isolated more or less, and that's why I ran away. But while away, my colleagues came back and persuaded me to come back in 2005. And I took the risks and came back. But I came back again on the eve of another election. I came back in October, or in fact on October 26th of 2005 for the election of 2006. So again, and shortly after I came back, I was detained. That's when I was charged with rape, terrorism, possession of guns, and all kinds of things. And I stayed in prison until January. So I did not participate in a campaign or organizing. Though parties had been formed, they were not organized. So even in 2006, I gave the benefit of doubt that maybe if we are organized. The point you were saying, you know, if we developed structures and we were organized and we are able to control electoral processes at the polling station, that maybe the outcome will be different. And I spent 5 years doing a lot of groundwork. 2011 is the election in which I was allocated the least votes I have ever had in an election. After all that preparation and so on, and you know, so it became clear to me in 2011 that Mr. Museveni's determination, in fact, every day that passes, he entrenches himself to not give up power, and that therefore, using political, democratic processes to remove an entrenched military dictatorship was a joke, and that therefore the way to go was to now rally people to remove their cooperation from the regime, to disobey indeed the regime. Because you see, anybody who has power because people are obedient to them. People respond to their to their authority. If people simply don't respond, you are gone. No matter how much weaponry you have, how much soldiers how many soldiers you have, it doesn't matter. You know, Egypt had an army of 500,000 people when Mubarak was deposed, because people simply refused to cooperate anymore. He had to go, and so they can achieve it with the minimum cost, whereas war causes a lot of destruction of property, of people, and so on. It does not empower people. It empowers the armed. And so I interacted with all different situations and came to the conclusion that the way to go is to start a struggle, to fight for our freedom, but not using violence. And it worked. You know, people say that, for example, walk to work didn't work, but it really worked. I think if there is any real threat that Mr. Museveni has ever had in all these 35 years, it was from the walk to work, and he was nearly gone. In fact, if I was not held captive in Kenya, where I had been taken for treatment, I am not sure, I doubt that he would have had a successful swearing in 2006, because people had been, rallied and developed confidence. And so I very, very much strongly believe that that is the way to go. Don't forget that people that were far more better organized, far more resourced in terms of military might, the British Empire left Uganda on account of civil disobedience you are talking about. We never went to war like Kenya, which used the Mau Mau rebellion. We never went to war here.
But, Richard Kanu, if I could just ask you, in the years of civil disobedience, the state has shown that it will react with violence. And
that is,
and we've seen it even in the election period, that it used violence. As a leader of this movement, the struggle, are there other ways you've devised to fight against this violence? Because this violence has real net effect on people who are out there.
Yes, you see, violence has got a very, very limited effect. The violence of the state. They can, can you imagine what the state would do if people were sufficiently organized to do what even now we have been suggesting to them to do, to withhold their food, how would the violence be applied? If from next week there is no food coming to the market, how would the violence be applied? How would these soldiers that are terrorizing our people in the CMI there, how would they respond when they have no food? Violence can be, will they go and tear gas gardens? What will they do with their violence? Because, you know, non-cooperation can, and this is what defeated even the British, because people refused to buy from the shops. Now, can you force people to buy from shops so that you get tax? Because we pay taxes willfully to the government. If we want to withhold taxes, we can withhold taxes from the government, and they won't have money to pay the soldiers to carry out the violence. And once that happens, the government is gone. And it's not only gone, but those with the means of violence would have realized that people have more power than they do. And once they realize that, then they will become subordinate to the people. And that's what this struggle is about. This struggle is about subordinating those with means of creating violence, to make them workers of our people. Now, and it only takes time for people to wake up to that, to their power. And so what we have been calling Plan B, I have always been explaining that it has three components. The first and most critical component of it is awareness of the power that you have to withhold your support to the regime. And once we collectively withhold our support to the regime, it's gone. It's gone, overnight gone. We don't need to pick up any guns or anything. If we withhold our support to the regime, it's gone. If tomorrow we all unite and say no food to the market, it's gone. That will be the end of Mr. Museveni and his soldiers. And not just them, but you will not have anybody else use force to dominate you. Because everybody will know, and the people themselves will know. And by the way, it's already catching up. You've been seeing people, you know, protesting in limited ways, because protest is not only to deal with a national issue. Teachers are the most oppressed people in this country. You know, they should be the most important, because the challenge of not just Uganda, the challenge of Africa today is the knowledge gap between Africans and other people. We shall be extinct soon if we don't get our act together on account of lack of knowledge. So teachers should be the most important, the most, you know, prized resource that we have. They should be most well paid. They should be most well developed. But they are totally neglected. Now, teachers can assert their will, because even all these soldiers and all these people, they want their children also to get knowledge. If they withheld their knowledge from giving it, everybody would recognize their importance. But they are not organized enough. First of all, they don't have the consciousness. Two, the regime divides their leaders, buys their leaders. Whoever comes up to organize them is taken, like that man who was trying to organize the teachers. He's now somebody in State House. I don't know, he's in charge of something in the State House.
Yes.
You know, so he abandoned the teachers. And that's what happens even in our politics. When you come up and start conscientizing people, you are declared an enemy of the state, and the machinery, the propaganda machinery of the state starts attacking you, being isolated so that you are crushed. That's what we've been suffering. That's what I've been suffering all these years. And that's what everybody who steps up to do that will suffer.
Doctor, do you feel a level of disillusion with people who started with you in the civil disobedience? Do you feel they've been disillusioned and saying, 10 years later, not much has changed, maybe this is not it?
Yes, there are frustrations in every struggle, because you are struggling against very strong tools of domination. They are very strong. The tools of domination in the hands of Mr. Museveni are very strong. If you control resources, as I have said, you know, and use them manipulatively like they do, you get very far. The violence, if you use that kind of violence, you know, to intimidate people and to break them down and to, you know, so I have no grievances against those who capitulate. I understand that, you know, it's not an easy course. You know, it's like even when we were in the bush fighting, it was never easy. It takes a lot of stamina, a lot of resilience, a lot of determination. But people used to defect even from the war and hand themselves over to those you are fighting. And, you know, I remember, I've been telling this story to my colleagues, just at the end of 1983, in the offensive of UNLA, just before the death of the late David Oyuto Jok, who was leading that offensive, we were in a very bad spot. And our people were defecting like anything. We had no food, we had no clothes, we had no medicine, we had no even bullets to fight with. We were in a very, very tight corner with more or less defeat facing, you know, in our face. And many people became disillusioned and were deserting and surrendering. But those who held on, because things become tough, and normally the darkest part of the night is before dawn. If you are not strong enough mentally, you will think you'll never see the light again. And that's where we are now. So even as many people become disillusioned, give up, I know from experience, not just of our own struggle, but even of the other struggles that have gone on similar to ours, that as you break down the regime, because the tools in their hands are stronger than yours, you know, they break you down also. And towards the end of the struggle, it's really a test of will. It's a test of who has stronger will. And if you hold on to your will, like we must hold on to our will, if we are not to become dominated forever, then the other ones break.
Doctor, every choice has consequences. Are you willing to accept the fact that FDC has lost the position as the leading opposition party in the country as a consequence of the fact that rather than organize as an opposition party, it's chosen to organize as a civil disobedience party?
You see, again, it depends on what you want to achieve. What is there to achieve in Parliament? Because Parliament is a totally captive institution, like all other institutions. So if your goal is to have more people in Parliament, you go for that. But it achieves absolutely nothing. You see, in 1980, DP had 51 members of Parliament. UPC had 74. And UPM had 1. So DP had more than 40% of the members of Parliament. Museveni, who was of UPM, had only 1. And even that one didn't sit in parliament. It was Dr. Kiyonga.
He ran away.
He ran away.
Yes.
And even that one had won by default, because the DP candidate had been killed in Kasese, a man called Muhindo. And the DP members protested to vote UPM. So it was even not really a UP. So UPM had nothing. DP had more than 40% of parliament. But because Museveni then made the correct judgment call to say parliament will not deliver the change, he went to fight. And because people agreed with him, they went with him. They didn't go with the 40 that went to parliament. And since then, Museveni has been the dominant force, and the DP went down. So it depends what you are pursuing. If your objective is to have more members in a powerless parliament, you can organize and have more members, but it won't cause the change that we need. And that's why it's wrong for us in prison to become rivals, because we are rivaling to go to a place that will keep us in prison. That's why if we even want to contest, areas that are already in our hands should not be the ones we are fighting over. You know, to find that, you know, NOOP, FDC, DP, all of them have candidates for mayor. When Kampala was liberated a long time ago, because Mr. Museveni has never won Kampala in the last 20 years. Never. At least since I started contesting. And that's why I've been proudly saying I'm the president of Kampala. Museveni has never won Kampala. Yeah. He has powered their money, what? Never. So why then should we go to make Kampala a battleground for ourselves? Absolutely not. So all this is how what we want to achieve, and how we organize ourselves to achieve it. So I personally, even if FDC did not have one member of parliament, I would not be discouraged at all. Because all those members who go, even actually, you know, I've been very critical of our own members in parliament. Because how have they been in parliament advancing the struggle that many of them just go there, committees, I don't know what, they become diverted into secondary things rather than keeping a sharp focus on the struggle that we are engaged in. So parliament is not going to be an institution that liberates us. Absolutely not. And you can see now, already there is a whole diversionary debate looking for Speaker of Parliament, Deputy Speaker of Parliament. All this is just diversionary. Because whether there is a Speaker of Parliament or no Speaker of Parliament, they are just going to be working for Museveni. You know, people were in a pandemic. You saw what happened in Parliament. You know, people sharing money. When our people are starving everywhere, people were just busy sharing money in Parliament and indeed allocating trillions to State House. About $1 trillion was allocated to State House when people were dying in the pandemic of hunger. That it is in State House for sacred work. In the home of Mr. Museveni, not office, in the home. So what is that parliament? What importance should we attach to it?
Dr. Bezi, let's take a short break, but when we get back, we'll get back to this conversation. So much for coming back with us on the spot. We still have retired Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye with us. I want us to get into just how much the Western embassies have shaped the Ugandan opposition. I know in the opening of Daniel Kalinaki's book on you, he talks about how after post-election phase, donors always meet opposition leaders and urge them to concede the outcome of the results, go to a court process. That seems different from what you're taking, which is a civil disobedience thing. Just how much have the Western embassies shaped the Ugandan opposition and the way that it thinks and acts?
Well, first of all, it's important to appreciate that ambassadors or representatives of foreign countries are accredited to the government and in fact to the president. They are allowed to come in by the government. So if you are appointed ambassador, you cannot take your position unless the government gives you an okay. The government can say, no, no, that ambassador we don't want. And your government will appoint another one. So in order to come, you must have a good relationship with the sitting government. Because if you don't, you lose your job. And you come to establish relations with the government. Of course, that is assumed that the government has arisen from the people through their will. So having a relationship with the government is assumed to be having a relationship with the people. Now, the problem is that our governments don't arise from the people. In fact, they arise and stay in office against the people. But those accredited to them have a duty to promote relations with those that are working against the people. And that is the challenge. Now, even though the governments, therefore, even though these diplomats must work well with the sitting government, there are also responsibilities that arise from international covenants. Because, like I have been saying, human rights are not territorial. They are not, you can't say, me, I'm the sovereign here. Don't talk about me when I am killing my people. No, people's lives and their rights are universal. Human rights are universal. And our countries have all committed to behaving in a particular way in terms of those rights. So these diplomats who represent their governments also have a duty to ensure that the rights of people in the countries they represent are up to the standards that those countries have committed themselves to. And this becomes, of course, very important when they also play a role in sustaining the government, in donating, in lending to these governments. Now, a government like these ones of ours uses more money of other taxpayers than of our own taxpayers. You find a budget is more than half funded by other taxpayers. So those taxpayers then start having, and their governments start having influence in our country beyond even just those international obligations, what the international obligations provide. Because whoever pays the piper has a right to ask for what to play. And therefore, we have been affected by how the foreign governments respond or work with our government regarding our interests. Now, all foreign governments come to have relations with us for their own interests, not primarily for our interests, for their own interests. And their interests are trade, their interests are to get resources from Africa, their interests are sometimes geopolitical, how to get international support for their causes. Now, all these are primarily served by having good working relations with whoever has power. And so, in most cases, regrettably, their interests run counter to the interests of those that are dominated by these governments. It would be all right if we were a democracy. But when we are not a democracy, you find that their interests, when they are aligned with those of the government, harm the people that those governments are dominating. And that has been a challenge with the diplomats and how they relate with the government in Uganda. But happily, over time, I think that has changed, and there are many reasons why it has changed. Partly because the geopolitical interests have also changed. Mr. Museveni had presented himself as a champion, for example, of the against Islamic extremism, which was coming from North Africa and to some extent in the Horn of Africa. And his forces were applied to deal with that. Now that has over time changed a lot. Sudan has a new dispensation there. Even the sanctions against Sudan are being lifted and so on. Somalia has since changed and so on. So the geopolitical interests have changed. The rivalry between the developed world in Africa has changed because of the development of China and other Eastern countries, and how they relate to Africa. You know, they are investing huge amounts of money in developing infrastructure in Africa and so on and so forth. So now, I think the Western countries are beginning to realize that the domination of our people through the government they have been supporting may become injurious to them even. So if their interests, whether temporarily or not, align with the interests of the population, it's a wonderful thing that can help to spur the changes that we need. But having said that, I think it will be the biggest error we would make as a people is to think that we can be liberated by foreigners. If the interests of foreigners are aligned with ours, it will help us getting the freedom we need faster. But the onus is on us. The primary responsibility is on us to do what needs to be done to be free. And we shall not get freedom painlessly. Freedom is earned, especially when we are contesting a vicious military regime they will terrorize us, indeed like they are doing now, with all these thousands of people incarcerated, being killed and so on. Those are the emotions we must go through to get. And some people, think that you must, you can imagine the criticism that has been leveled against the UPC government of the 1980s when they were responding to armed insurrection. These ones are not, nobody's armed. Nobody's using violence. But the regime is very violent. So we must know that to get freedom, we will have to pay some cost. And we must be prepared to pay it. And we should not fear to organize and to challenge the regime. Yes, they will kill some people. Some of us are always moving with the death, and that's how it will be always. But we must take a stand to say enough is enough. And happily, I think the people of Uganda increasingly get it.
Doctor, if I could ask you, the voting patterns that we saw in the last election, central Uganda, 75% of our GDP, most of them voted for the opposition. The northern Uganda, which occasionally voted for you, went back and reverted to the NRM. Is this something that you'd say your opponent, rival Museveni, has described this as tribal voting, inspired by sectarianism? What's your own assessment?
You see, one of the things that really intrigues me, and it goes on, is for people to use the Uganda Electoral Commission results as a yardstick to analyze what is going on in the politics in the country. It's not. It's trash, absolute trash. And a narrative that is perpetuated by the thieves, by the mafia. I was annoyed to see, especially NBS with the command center, every evening analyzing. In 2016, Besigye got 60% here, Museveni got now, what will happen? All these are just fake results. You cannot use results of an election that is patently fraud to analyze what is going on in the country. And indeed, Mr. Museveni has been trying to use elections to create narratives that divide the country. You see, when you are dominating the majority, any group that dominates others uses 4 major tools. The first one is terror, to cause fear in the minds of people. And that's what this regime, even when they terrorize us leaders, it's not just to injure us as people, it's to cause the chilling effect in the population. When the people come and shoot people openly on the streets, they want to create terror in the minds of people. That's the first thing they use. The second thing they use is the manipulation using the wealth they control. Renting support of journalists, of politicians, of professionals, and so on. But the third thing is to divide the majority, so that even though they are the majority, they find themselves operating as a minority. And they employ and they use, sophisticated means to divide people and create animosity amongst them, amongst the dominated. Because if they are working together, if they realize they are together, that is the end of the person dominating them. And so, dividing people regionally, ethnically, is one of the tested approaches that every dictator uses. Before they said that the problem is now Buganda, they were saying the problem are Northerners. Northerners are disgruntled because they lost power. And they are the ones voting for Besigye. Everybody else is voting for Museveni. That was the narrative before. And actually, when I used to go to northern Uganda, then the people in northern Uganda were also sometimes buying into that narrative and saying, but for you, for us, we vote for you. Your people don't vote for you. They believed that I was not getting votes in the south. That was not the case, you know. But it's a manipulation. And that manipulation was also accompanied by intensified patronage along those lines. So indeed the people in the north whom they were projecting as the only ones who don't support Museveni were isolated. They were not given appointments in government. They were not given, they were isolated. And patronage was concentrated in the south. There was a time when in my small district of Rukunjiri, we had 10 RDCs appointed from there. And in campaigns, they would all come with their pickups and soldiers and so on to terrorize people. That's what they would call their support. So that, went on for a while until now, when in the south, the opposition is no longer suppressible. That time it was the north-south divide. Now the opposition is not suppressible in the south. In fact, I have been seeing debates. I don't know what would have happened if I was in this election now. Because now they are giving the narrative that Ankole, Kigezi, Bunyoro, I don't know what, voted for Museveni. Nonsense. Museveni no longer has support anywhere in this country, including the last bastion of his support, which was in that strip they call the cattle corridor. You saw what was going on in the NRM primaries, in Kiruhura, where he comes from, in Zimbabwe, in Isingiro. I'm telling you, in Isingiro, nobody voted. Nobody. Same in those areas, nobody votes. So now that, first of all, northern Uganda and wherever there is concentrated, whatever he isolates as concentrated opposition to him, he takes the guns. So he took the guns to northern Uganda and destroyed northern Uganda. After destroying them, then now he started the patronage there, recruiting more people in the government from the north, promoting people in the military from the north, and so on. Now the carrot. And of course, people now went from the camps, devastated, nothing, to totally poor. So he takes Saleh with wealth creation there to now give handouts and create even the others that haven't got, remain on their knees begging. You saw what happened in 2016 when the entire Kasese region voted massively against Museveni. The next thing, the army was there with General Erweru to destroy the people of Kasese. Hundreds have been in prisons. They were released. Some of them were released under pressure during this election. I saw them loaded onto buses who were charged with murder, with all kinds of capital offenses. Now those offenses have disappeared. They have gone back to their homes, So are those the ones now supporting Museveni? Absolutely not. So now, because there was a candidate from Central Region who now attracted a lot of attention and support, so he can say, okay, Buganda vote, the same things. You remember in 1980, that's exactly what happened even with DP. I told you that DP got 51 MPs, they were all in Buganda and Busoga. All of them from Buganda and Busoga. Not because DP did not have support in the north. The candidates of DP, 18 candidates of DP, did not find their way to the polling station, to the nomination center. UPC candidates were declared unopposed. You saw in this election what happened in Bunyoro, in Kasaija, Matia Kasaija's constituency. Matia Kasaija should be in jail together with his master, Mr. Museveni, for what they did in Bunyoro just now. That they appointed an opponent of Kasaija. A nominated opponent of Kasaija was appointed to head an institution in Kasaija's ministry during the election. And he said, I'm no longer, so Kasaija was declared unopposed. This is a crime, incredible. And he's still a minister of finance, and the country keeps quiet about Kasaija, not taking him to prison. And Museveni, who wrote a letter, you know, saying they can appoint Kasaija's opponent into a government office. I hope that fellow who was appointed into the Uganda Investment Authority, I hope he never steps in our office there. The people of Uganda, those are the people they should go and pull out and throw out, you know. So is Museveni now the popular candidate in Bunyoro, that he was elected and opposed? Absolutely not. So this narrative is another outrageous manipulation, and even self-defeating, because even if it was the truth that Buganda and Busoga voted massively against you, what makes it ethnic? If you are yourself saying that Ankole and Kigezi and Western has voted for you, you know, I told you all the polling stations where 100% of registered voters voted for Museveni are in his place. So why is it that those who voted against you in other regions are tribal, those who voted for you are not tribal? It's self-defeating, but it's deliberate, calculated manipulation of the population to divide and rule. So he now wants, just like the UPC government did, to turn everybody against Buganda and isolate Buganda and make that the narrative, and eventually crash, because that's what the next thing he will do, just like he did with the Musinga of Rwenzururu. And even the crashing of the Musinga of Rwenzururu was a signal to others not to try, you know. So I hope that Ugandans will really see through this and we remain united and say enough is enough. You've destroyed our country, enough.
Dr. Besigye, twice over, people have attempted a mediation between you and Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. In this election, immediately the election ended, people were calling for there needs to be talks. Seeing where the future of the country is headed, would you subject yourself to talks with the president? And if you would, on what basis? What are the things that you would ask?
You see, Mr. Museveni has committed a lot of atrocities as a person. That's why we have taken evidence to the International Criminal Court. The right place he should be in is a prison. That is the only right place he should be in. He has created a lot of atrocities, crimes, you know, against humanity. And I hope that indeed he accounts for his actions. But yes, the country, because Mr. Museveni is not Uganda, like he wants everybody to believe. Mr. Museveni is not NRM. They are decent people who unknowingly or for different reasons, largely of survival, associate with him. Those are perfectly good citizens. And yes, we must have dialogue amongst us as Ugandans to chart a way forward. Even in that dialogue, by the way, if Mr. Museveni made it easy, among other things, we could grant him amnesty from his crimes and say, since you have realized that the country can go on, you know, you will not be charged with anything when you leave office. That can be one of the things to help the country heal and go forwards with little pain. So dialogue is a must at some stage. But dialogue over what? We must dialogue on how to restructure and take the country forward. In other words, it's a dialogue for a transition from gun rule to people rule. It's not a dialogue between Besigye and Museveni or between this one and that one on how they share the spoils of the country. No. Because that's what sometimes when people talk about dialogue, it's to share power. It's to get ministries. It's to get, that is not what the country needs. The country needs fundamental reforms. For example, fundamental constitutional reforms. One of the reasons Buganda clearly is unhappy with what is going on, and this is nothing to do with being tribal, is that their aspiration has been for a federal government. And now it's no longer an aspiration of just Buganda. It's a realization that concentration of power at the center is one of the sources of the pain we are going through. That this power should be dispersed into the nations of, because Uganda was not one nation. That's our history. Our history is that Buganda was a nation totally independent of others. Ankole was a nation. Bunyoro was a nation. So, bearing in mind that history, one of the fundamental reforms, which indeed through the Odoki Commission people expressed, was that we should decentralize and create, these different power groups that manage their matters. Now, that is a legitimate demand. So through dialogue, the dialogue I'm talking about and the transition that the country needs should deal with 4 things that we consider are critical. The first one is the constitutional reforms. The second, which includes even the questions of land and so on. 2, the institutional reforms, how to have checks and balances within the state of Uganda, that parliament has its role, is independent and does this, the executive, the judiciary is independent, and how to achieve that. Kenya tried to go through those kinds of reforms, and I think it has helped them a bit. Thirdly, to reconcile the country. We are a country that has a lot of wounds. All these massacres that have been going on in northern Uganda, in West Nile, in Buganda, in Teso and eastern Uganda, in Kasese, we need to reconcile this, have a truth-telling process, justice, and reconciliation. And, so these are some of the of the things. And then, of course, how to have free and fair elections.
Dr. Besigye, what role are you going to play now moving forward?
Well, I have only been playing one role since I was an adult. And it's a role that I was forced into. It's not a role that I set out to play. I set out to be a medical doctor, which I have not become. The role I was forced into by the circumstances of our country is to do everything within my power and means to make sure that we live in a free country where we have equal rights and equal opportunities. And doing everything humanly means, as I pointed out a little earlier, mobilizing our fellow citizens to realize the need for those fundamental changes, to organize, and we have to pass the necessary information and support on how to organize, and ultimately to take action that causes these changes to happen. In other words, that is what we describe as the struggle for change, for fundamental changes that our country needs. I have committed my entire life literally to this, not as a design. I did not set out to do this. I have found myself to be doing this. And, you know, since I was in my early 20s, I have not done anything literally for myself except to do this. And I'm not about to change. I'm now in my mid-60s.
Doctor, what's the relationship now between you and your supporters, FDC supporters, and supporters of National Unity Platform, and Robert Kyagulanyi? Because the population is actually asking, between Besigye and Robert Kyagulanyi, what's going to be the future of the opposition?
You see, I don't see, I have pointed out, I don't see these political entities, sometimes you call them political parties, as the defining factor in how we function. No. I have people that I trust and work with totally in different political formations. I have people I don't trust at all in my own party, in FDC, and whom I believe we are not heading in the same direction. So, for me, I have defined my role at this time as not one that is guided by partisanship. Not at all. Anybody who identifies with the kind of changes that I aspire to see in my country is a comrade, is a colleague. Whether he's in NUP, whether he's in FDC, whether he's in NRM, is a colleague. Anybody who believes in a different direction, whether he's in my party, whether he's in NRM, whether he's in NUP, is an opponent. So, and hopefully, those with the same objectives, with the same aspirations, should distill and work increasingly coherently to achieve those goals. And that's why I am an avid supporter today of something that has been just emerging, a nascent initiative by the Honorable Paul Kawanga Semogerere of unity in diversity. I think that unity in diversity must be very purposeful, that it is a unity to achieve these goals. And whoever does not subscribe to that should unite with others in whatever they subscribe to. So I see that, you know, partisanship as is traditionally understood as an obstacle to the liberation process that we are engaged in. And I hope that leaders that truly want liberation appreciate that, and that we can weave a unity of purpose to achieve that at the shortest time possible. As I have pointed out, time is not our ally. We are going to become extinct. The people to take over Uganda have already arrived. All these foreigners you see, they are already taking it over. When I'm heading to Masaka and I see all those Chinese, you know, investments, they will only expand. They will not push back. And rightly, because we are useless. We are proving that we are really not fit for this wonderful country that God gave us. We have no right to live under this, you know, wonderful environment, beautiful soils and so on, when we are foolish, you know. So the earlier we get our act together, the better for our survival and for the posterity of this country.
Dr. Bestie, very finally, at a personal level, do you have any regrets about where we are right now, knowing that you've been in the struggle for a long time? Do you have any regrets?
I think it would be deceitful to think that one can go through 40 years of struggle without regrets. Because, you see, when you look backwards, you have the benefit of now the knowledge you have acquired along the way. I mean, for example, if we had known that Mr. Museveni would, or even armed struggle, that armed struggle would not engender democratic change, I wouldn't have participated in it. I truly believed that there were bad guns and that we could hold good guns and take off the bad guns and democratize the country. Evidence has shown, and you know, the reality has shown that that was an error, that it's not bound to happen. In fact, violence greatly weakens civil society rather than empowering it, and therefore makes it far much more difficult to cause the gunmen to account to a weakened civil society. So these, I wouldn't call them regrets, because at the time I made those decisions, I think with what tools I had at my disposal, if I had the same tools and went back to the same place, possibly I would make the same decisions. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, I think they were not the best decisions that one would have made. Even to trust, you know, we trusted Mr. Museveni. I now know that people can be fake, you know, and even today I hear people promoting, you know, the idea that, you know, me, I am a good person. I have been telling people that you have no reason to trust me. Absolutely none. What you should, so you can agree with what I am saying, but don't trust the